Convene this next meeting here. We're here to hear from Public Works and Stratton Land Services Incorporated. And I will just turn it over to you to start us off.
Okay. To some extent, I guess, are you guys familiar much at all with what is going on, or how far do I need to go back to bring you up to speed?
I think the other thing is we're filming for the public, so it wouldn't hurt.
Okay.
And I need to go back to the basics all the time. It's just age related, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that feeling. Are you familiar with where our Kenyon Edition is? Okay. So, I guess back up just a little bit. I've been the county surveyor since 2007, I think. Mostly reviewing plats and stuff. And I think I emailed you a week or so ago, just trying to get up to speed and say who's who and whom I work with. I guess I'm working with Dan on plats a little bit now. And
I apologize if you didn't get an answer.
no worries.
I'm not necessarily getting everything I should yet, or remembering where to file it.
Okay. A lot of it's just figure out what's going on and get things organized and get started. So, basically, I was just reviewing plats and working. I was basically working through Dan. I worked with Jeff Legg before him, and then when he had his turmoil last year, I ended up contracting directly with the commissioners. And basically, I have three parts to my job. One is reviewing plats. One of them is if you guys need any advice on survey-related information, I can help you with that. And over the years, I've done that quite a bit with Dan on different things. And then the third issue is any special projects that come up. And if you guys want me to work on them, it's just more of we work out directly at that point. With regards to Kenyon Edition specifically, Keisha Oxname, is her last name? Got a hold of me 2 years ago probably and wanted an estimate just to work out, find some right-of-ways, do a little mapping. About that time she was phasing out. Mike Fitzgerald kind of took over a little bit, helping me figure out what's going on, but the whole project for me has been a little bit of feeling out what are we really trying to accomplish and what's going on. My understanding at this point is basically you have some old right-of-ways established by a plat that was done back in, I believe, 1906. Some of the landowners, I believe, want either some roads vacated or opened up or some things of that nature. And I think the questions are, what do you have the ability to have, and then looking where to go from there. Are you guys familiar much with boundaries and how they come to be? And should figure out how far back to go with this.
It wouldn't hurt to go back a little bit to make sure we're all on the same page.
So Kenyon Edition is a rather large map, and I got photocopies. I actually took pictures to stand over the top of it. The area where fundamentally, once you roll out on the floor, it's too big for the copy machine.
That's okay.
So fundamentally what we're looking at is this portion, Kenyon Edition. You have Burke Road that runs along the Northern Pacific. Well, they had a railroad right away that went through there. There was another railroad that went through here, the Oregon and Western, and it was basically everything on this side of the railroad was the question. There's a few owners. There have been some roads that have developed here. I know I've gone back as far on Google Earth as far as 1992 and see a lot of the improvements at that time were roughly like they are now. Anytime we're trying to figure out where things are in a plat, our ultimate goal is to figure out where were they originally and reestablishing the original location. As near as I can tell with everything I've looked at in this area and talking to other surveyors and stuff that worked in the area, if there was any monumentation or anything that would help you get started in there, property corners that didn't say anything, that didn't exist. Anybody's ever been able to find. So the only thing that really fixed where these properties were was the railroad right away, which kind of helps you in one direction, but that's about it. Are you familiar with what a sectional land is? Okay, and you break it down. This is what's referred to as a 16th line. So it's, if you broke it out into a square mile, and you've got the center that runs north and south, the next one east, this is that east line that would run through there. And there's a monument on the east-west line that would go through this intersection right here. And compared to this monument was reset by Bureau of Land Management in 1986. What we don't know is from the plat how that monument relates to where they thought it was back in 1906 when they recorded the plat. So these surveyors have done work in this area, have generally tried to figure out how to hold this line and hold the railroad, but there's about 30 feet extra on this side here compared to the plat, so there's been some various things that I've seen that have juggled this around. So I was hired to, like I said, go out and map some things and figure out basically the improvements and where the right-of-way are. So we have, this is what I prepared to this point for a topographic map. This is where East Street comes off of Burke. I'll try to hatch it so you see it a little bit better. And then there's some various improvements in some of the right-of-ways that haven't been opened. So I think that's what we're fundamentally what we're trying to get to. As far as resolving where,
If some of you are wanting to see more, I'm okay with you moving up or standing up.
as far as determining where the right-of-ways are in relation to all the improvements, like I say that the BLM surveyed this line in 1986, and there was this 30 feet excess. It appears that there have been at least 2 different surveyors, possibly 3 that have been in the area. Jim Banks surveyed this property that's not part of the plat over here, and this jog shows up on a lot of the surveys, which kind of becomes significant because it's not supposed to be there. But when he surveyed this, he basically held the BLM section line, surveyed east, and I think he did a reasonably good job of identifying the railroad right away with what he did. I don't know if the tracks were stolen at that time or how much of the road bed was left, but it looks reasonable from what I've been able to tell from where the right of way is now. There's a gentleman that lives at this property that indicated he thought he had had a surveyor look at some stuff. There's nothing recorded on it. There's a couple of monuments here that I found that when he acquired his property, I'm gonna have the lots on here to make it easier to see, but there's 10 lots across here. And he acquired, I think, first the east 2 lots, then he acquired everything except lot 1, and then later on he acquired lot 1. I think these 2 monuments were actually, somebody did the surveying when he had lot 2 there and set those monuments for lot 2. The method they used for setting that is they basically held the 16th line on the railroad and built out this way, which is, I think if I was gonna go in there and there was nothing else done, any what evidence and stuff I found as far as usage and stuff, that would be my first inclination. One of the things that if you were to hold that scenario is East Street would be completely out of the right of way. This right of way would shift this way about 30 feet. Now whether it was ever intended to be in the right of way or if somebody just put the road in for something to use, I don't know the history of that. I haven't gonna track that down. Then there was, like I say, Jim Banks came in and he did this survey over here. He also did a survey around the railroad here. At that time, he tried to hold this monument. It appeared to rotate the line. And he's got a monument, I found some of his monuments here, here, and here, which basically are supposed to represent here, here, and here. So those are shifted down a different direction. And are you guys familiar with Chris Fall? He's done a lot of the surveying around the area. And he has since come in and done 4 or 5 surveys in the area and done by far the bulk of it. And I ended up holding his surveys primarily just because he's done so much work, it's hard to justify doing something different. So for purposes of showing the lines, I've held his work. What he did, as near as I can tell, is he tried holding this monument and rotating the plat to it, realized everything was shifted 30 feet this way because of that 30 feet there. I think he basically slid the whole thing up East Street just to come in closer and establish something. Some of it looks reasonable. I think he missed the railroad right away in here by about 7 or 8 feet when he did that, but long story to get down to, basically there's been 3 interpretations out here that 30 feet plus or minus is shifting all over the place. From a surveyor standpoint, like I say, our main goal is to try to get back to where were things originally, but without any evidence of knowing there and nothing we can else say, okay, this is where the plat intended things to be. Like I say, ultimately what I've done is, there's a principle that if a surveyor goes in and makes decisions, if you can't prove what they did is wrong, you basically accept it, and that's kind of where I've ended up with supporting what Chris Fall's done at this point, is I haven't found enough to say anything else is more conclusively better. And part of, I guess, the reason for this, that kind of long explanation to it, is there's various improvements that fit on one scenario better than the other, and mostly emphasize that in making decisions in here, there's a little bit of play back and forth depending on how things potentially play out. There's kind of a principle in surveying or in boundaries that a lot of times you have, okay, this is where your property is, and you can adjust properties with a neighbor or something, but you also end up when boundaries are ambiguous, there's a certain amount of, basically, if you can get everybody to agree on a common what works out for everybody, that's usually the best scenario. And I think that's kind of, I guess, where I would encourage you guys is to consider the different individual variations into, okay, what can we find out that it really takes care of everybody involved. My understanding, there's one property owner that owns this, and I didn't realize until just recently, I guess they also own a couple parcels down here. It was under a corporation name or something like that. So they have some interest in what's going on. There's also a property owner that lives right here that's pretty much established in this fence. So they've got some various interests going on. Property over here that other than kind of a field that's fenced off here that I don't even think they're using it for anything that I could tell as far as, they might have some animals that run out there once in a while, but they're involved, but they're not overly impacted from anything we may see. And like I say, there's a landowner that owns this property that I don't know if he's really involved in what people have been talking to the county about or not. But one of my concerns is if you use Chris Falls scenario that I've used in here, this is actually his garage, his house sits here, quite to the right point, but it is into the right of way based on Chris Falls scenario. But in looking what he did, I think based on where the railroad was, as far best as I could figure out where it's at, I think he would have been okay based on that. So ultimately, there's some different things that figure into that. I think a lot of, I guess, this area, East Street used to run all the way through. You have a Brookside down here that's not open. The plat actually kind of indicated maybe the creek was supposed to flow down between the, would have been an interesting roadway if it would have developed that way. Not sure what it's supposed to look like, but it would have been interesting. F Street, basically what you have that is installed is E Street. Up here at Tomshee runs this way and kind of peters out right here without any turnaround or anything at this point. Then the road goes this way. The county actually acquired some right-of-way through here and vacated the original right-of-way through here previously. East Street used to go through, they vacated East Street and some of the alleys that ran down here and acquired two parcels over here that I believe was kind of intended to replace this. So you have a right-of-way basically that runs through here at the moment. And then this is Brookside.
And how wide of a right-of-way is that?
Oh, it's the lot, I believe they're 40 footers.
40.
And then Brookside is here. The actual creek that we measured last fall runs through like this. And have you guys by any chance been down there and seen what the creek looks like down there? You have a creek bed, and then you have a bank back here, and it almost looks like a floodway here where it's been heavily deteriorated, but I kind of think it might have been more dredging or something, because there's some horizontal bars that might have been, I'm not sure historically.
It was remediated, that's what it
Oh,
was.
is that what that is?
That's what
Okay.
it was.
They pushed up a bunch
They
of
pushed
gravel out of the
They
creek.
pushed rock out of the creek,
Mhm.
and that's what it was.
Okay. So currently, this is kind of the top of the bank, and this is kind of a scrubby land, so as far as considering, I think one of the questions is that these parcels here is how they would get access, I believe might be one of the questions that's coming out of this, but I think part of that too is exactly how would you make use of that land and what figures into it. I'm not sure legally or practically as far as trying to fill out in there, if that's even, I don't know if that's an option or not, but, so that's kind of the history of what I know.
So these are potentially landlocked?
Not landlocked, because you have a right of way here, you have a right of way here,
All right.
but you have a, legally, I wouldn't think they're landlocked, but physically, they have some
Physically.
implications that are, I say this top of bank crosses here, actually gets into the, this parcel over here more at this point, so. I think when I understood when Jim was still here, and talking with him and Stephanie some, is I think one of the thoughts was, these people have a garage here, I think there was some thoughts of maybe of trying to vacate some of this stuff, maybe getting a turnaround snow pile area in here, I think with some of the discussions. I think there's some discussions on what these people over here can do with this land, but I think that's ultimately where this is going, and my job to some extent originally when it started was, okay, let's locate the right of ways, let's figure out the improvements in the right of way so you guys can make a better decision. Over time, I think that's kind of evolved with, okay, you're probably gonna adjust some things and tweak some things before we're done, so helping do some descriptions to do that accordingly, and,
So that's a right of way right here?
this is currently up street right away here, yeah.
So there's an alleyway that runs.
There's part of an alleyway that runs through to this point. It was vacated, the alley, the alley was vacated this direction.
Not all of it.
No, well, this part going this way was.
10 feet of it, the other 20 feet is attached to the county's property, it's not vacated,
The alley is 10, East Street is 20.
is 20.
According to what's recorded out here.
I'd have to, it's been a while since I looked at it, I'd have to go back and look at. So you're-
Fitzgerald or Jim were supposed to give you the recording number.
I have the recording document.
Okay.
I just have to dig it out here to see exactly, but, so you're, what are you saying as far as where it's?
The alley, they only gave up 10 feet to this homeowner here, and the county kept 10 feet of it. The street, they used to go through here, the county gave up 20 feet to this landowner and kept 20 feet to him.
I think that when you read the thing, there was actually, they gave up 10 feet and they gave up 20 feet to the document. I have to go back and read it to tell.
Yeah, the alley was 20 feet, and the, I guess the
Okay.
Burke Road side, 10 feet of it went to that property owner that was doing the land swap for putting a garage on East Street, and 20 feet of the west side of East Street went to her, but then I think it's lots 16 and 5 or whatever that the
Yeah,
county got.
Mhm.
If you read back through the legal on it, the southern 10 feet of the alley and the eastern 20 feet of East Street attached to like lot 16, which is the county's.
Counties. And I pretty much got that showing that that whole road goes through there. I showed the alley crossing at this point, but, I don't think the vacation got into 16.5 at all.
Is this below you?
Yes.
So right over here is the Beaner's property. Here, this is Ludwig, Tatman, and Beaner's here. And then Lucky
Brookside
Friday, or
Development.
Friday owns, where's F Street? This parcel right here. So F Street, essentially on plats, correct me if I'm wrong, ends here, right?
It does, now,
There's
one of the
18
things that
inches.
happened based on the plat and what, Chris Fall did when he did his survey, like I say, what he did is he rotated this way and then shifted the whole thing this way, which pulled it off of that line about 20 feet. And then what he did is he extended all of the lot lines out to that line, which would be appropriate, that's how you would handle that. The intention of the plat was to plat to the 16th line, so if it doesn't quite show up, you would extend things out to fit it, so. Originally, the way the plat showed it, there was a pretty good corner of lot 11 cut off, where in reality, this squares off and there's about 1.5 foot in here gap at the moment. Between the, section line and the block corner, as that squares out.
Which allows F Street to connect to Brookside Avenue.
Yeah.
Which Altus also did the same thing, came up with the same thing you just did.
Well, and basically what they did is they followed Chris Fall's scenario.
Right.
Which is, like I said, there's 3 scenarios out there, they all have some potential merit to them. Primarily, like I say, is what we're doing, what I did at least is held Chris Fall mostly from the standpoint of, he's done so much here, it would be harder to do something different than that. As far as the, like I said, I can look up those vacation questions that,
Dan, do you have anything as far as?
Well,
little bit
certainly,
more history with
the
this?
reason I came into this was happenstance that I'm here now, and certainly, I think I started with this however many, 6, 7 years ago, this started, based on the issues of structures being within the right of way of F Street. I was here when they did the E Street vacation and the realignment of Tom Shee. And we did that as a vacation and a realignment. In that process, we kept the E Street down to what would be the east there. And then as we worked through these processes, there was an application to vacate the portions of F Street and the alleyway for, at that time was the Tatman property. I don't know who owns it now. In those discussions, there was discussions of who was gonna pay for the surveying, who was gonna pay for the vacating. And in lieu of that, the county has had issues with where to plow snow to. So at the east end of that, Tom Shee, they were hopeful to negotiate some method of a corner there to have a place to push snow to and pile it up. It never really got past the negotiation stage of that process. The Tapmans ultimately did apply for a vacation of that right of way. It was an elongated series of meetings and hearings and meetings and hearings that should have been meetings and meetings that should have been hearings and various things. And so that's what sort of, I'm sure, brought Keisha and them into, because we started getting into what ultimately was happening. The ultimate decision of that case was to deny it. And so then it just has stayed that way since. It was a denial of the vacation of F Street.
so.
And there was a
then
long
those
list of
garages and
encroachments
stuff,
turned into the county.
Belongs to these people,
Where's
so
their,
that's what-
where does
that
that
lot
lot go to?
Pardon?
Where's their,
Yes,
how
this
big
is Tatman's right here.
Okay, so do they own land over here?
This is
too?
22
They
Tatman's. on
Yes.
the-
basically own
Yes.
all of this.
Yeah, they,
Subject to
The
an
right of way.
existing
Okay.
alley and, road there.
and then Burr starts here on F Street and comes
We're
this way.
east side of
Oh,
West.
okay.
So where it expanded is, as Mindy said, is there's other encroachments that were thought or known to be in the, so there was a whole list of encroachments that were put together for review. The previous administrations had done that. They started getting surveyors involved to try to really pinpoint, was something in or out of the right of way? And then where was East Street? So it's been this progression of getting different people involved to identify where these different things are. Ultimately, as Rob has stated, that he's been brought in to try to clean it all up, and it's a bit of a mess from the get-go. So definitely, there's certainly 3 or 4 different things going on at the same time, and one solution fixes others, but then doesn't fix the third one, and vice versa. So hopefully, I can help with the history of what's happened here. Ultimately, the goal is to determine, well, where is F Street? How should we, and probably should, vacate those portions out? Does the new property owners need to reapply for that? What is the legal process for that? The other encroachments need to be determined if they are encroachments or not. And if they are, then what do we do about them? What is the remedy? If they're not, then demonstrate that they're not encroachments and get down the road. And I think at some point the direction, tell me if what you need, Rob, is some direction on which method to go for as far as to delineate what is and what isn't. And then we can determine what's encroaching, what's not encroaching. And then we can determine what's the mitigation for those encroachments. You gotta have first to get second to get third. And right now we've had little parts of 1, 2, and 3, but never a full part of everything. And so there's never been any clarity, been any actual decisions made to what really can happen here. So certainly as the stories have gone, I've been part of most of those meetings, and then the other most I've not been part of any of them. So it's been, it's a little, I bring a lot to it, but I also was not included in a lot of the meetings, and so I may be, but I think I can help tell the backstory and help get to the ultimate solution, which is identify who owns what and where their stuff is, and let's get it on their viable and their actual piece of property, and then appropriately charge taxes and appropriately own stuff and appropriately have access, legal access to their properties.
Okay. So this is this place here, he owns everything, this.
Correct.
He owns
And
everything in here, like I said, except for the right of ways.
Reshowing this rather
So
than.
they just don't, they wouldn't just shove that right away this way on these other part of the land and use it and go down the other side, or how does that?
No, well.
Potential, you've also got this right away here that has some, so I think there's some options there, but.
You're
Nope.
telling,
You gotta ask.
you're telling part of the story, the reason this whole thing.
Only
came-
because you only know part of the story. You were brought in at the second
The
half.
reason this whole came about is the main water line off Burke Road comes right across here and turns up to my house.
Okay.
To get water back to these lots, my fastest way is right through here.
Cheapest.
Okay.
I've got a contractor, when we did the abandonment on the road and they turned it down, and bored. And I talked to the letter from the water district, I can bore underneath there and get the water line right there. Going this way is an extra, then, 3-4 years ago, $17,000, and I'll be danged if I'm gonna pay $17,000 for a garage that's valued at $8,000.
When we're the only people that have paid to have our properties surveyed.
We gave the option years ago to change the road from here and go back. Clean it up. And Dan, you talked to the Tapmans, they wouldn't go for that. They wanted to abandon the street and collect, and keep all their property. I was gonna, because of the angle, it would've, I don't know, maybe another 10 feet extra of pipe onto me. And they don't give away pipe, putting that in. But they wouldn't go for it. So then they went to.
If they were asked, we don't know for sure.
Then they went to this abandonment, cost us thousands of dollars in attorney's fees to fight this. And one of the biggest, I was very surprised when you said you looked at this property back here, because what your job was, as far as I knew, was just this, Brookside. But anyway, let's get back to, in the public hearing, when we had the public hearing. They decided they weren't gonna make a decision, they wanted more information. Well, you can't go outside of a public hearing to get more information. And one of their biggest one was to get this surveyed in, our property. And there were some other things too, which our attorney shut them down, and they had to make a decision on what was in front of them. So there's more to this whole story.
The
On
main,
what's going on here, and if you're talking about going by Chris Falls, that's Chris Falls' pin. There's no ifs, ands, or buts if it don't go through that garage.
Well,
so,
but I'd say it's somewhat arbitrary using Chris Falls.
Well, you gotta go by somebody. You
Not
can't
necessarily.
can't go Chris Falls here and somebody else over here and then somebody else over here.
okay, sit down. The only reason I'm
That's what
asking
we're
him to
trying
sit
to
down
find out
is
today.
because
That's
I'm the only
That's what we're
one.
trying to get.
Yeah.
The only
And,
reason I
I
had
guess
him
one of the
sit down
things-
is because I am actually out of this room, the only one that hasn't been involved in this the whole time. Dan was out of it part of the time. I tried to get stuff from Public Works and emailed with Mr. Stratton, and Public Works didn't even know what was going on after the prosecuting attorney's office took it. I met with Ben. What we were told, according to minutes that had just gotten revised and stuff, was they were calling it Brookside, but it was to figure out where Tomshe was, where Brookside, where the backside of Brookside was, where E Street is, where F Street is. They were going to put pins in the ground. There were some that Jim had written on there, I think in a green ink. There was about 8 of them. I met with Ben, and there was a second map set to Stratton that was like, no, we need to know where these points are too, plus some, I can't remember what you called them. They're not points, but you would know where the edge of Tomshe Avenue was so that you'd know.
Right-of-way lines.
Something like that. I can't remember what you called it in the email. So that's all that was supposed to be done at that point so that the commissioners could look at it and make some decisions on like, oh, here's an intersection and there's utility poles in the middle of it. Is this an encroachment? Should we have a Vista move their poles out of the middle of an intersection? Make those decisions that were on the encroachment thing. Then, or possibly go into if they wanted to vacate or whatever. But when Dan said that they were looking at possibly making a snow thing, there was only talks, blah, 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 nothing really happened. There was a legal description and a legal map drawn up, or platted up, whatever it's called, for Tapman's exhibits to vacate F Street and the alley. Along with that, on, I believe it was April 7th of 2020, was a legal description for a snow storage area and a map for the snow storage area, which were decisions that were made by the BOCC before any public hearing had been held. That's why it all kind of got stopped with the no snow shed thing. So it wasn't just talks, Dan, there were maps that were drawn up, and I'm pretty sure you've seen them, so that's why,
Well,
like I
that's what we
said.
have, and we did have those legal descriptions drawn up for those negotiation purposes. Those negotiations never reached an application, so as I said, they never got past the negotiation stage. And so the work that was done to identify that corner was simply done to identify what that space would be in square footage, so that you could equate that to the square footage that was being vacated and the costs involved with the surveying and to match that up. So it never got past those discussions. Those maps were created, they were part of the applications, and they were part of the discussions, but no decision was ever made on them to accept it or deny it. So that's where I stood with, though, yes, those snow storage areas was created by map and legal description, but it was never approved, never done, and never transferred, because the Tapmans didn't want to give up that acreage.
So-
And they instead decided to apply for the vacation of the F Street in the alley, and then we went through that process, and ultimately that was denied
Okay.
at the end of that hearing process.
So we're here today is to figure out which survey we're gonna follow, is that
No,
out
not
of
really
the
so much
three?
that, to some extent, I've had a little bit of issue, someone's understanding just who does what at the county and working through various things, but like I said, I've been kind of passed off from person to person, trying to figure out who am I trying to take care of, what am I trying to solve here, and I guess I need a little bit of direction. I kind of think after having gone through where we're at this point, that it probably makes sense to work with the road department to help bring you guys the information you need to make the decision you need to make, sounds like. I know some of the questions that have come up is, ALTA, which is another company out of Kellogg, had a surveyor that was working for him, and he was kind of addressing some of these other areas. And then the surveyor left the company, so they didn't have a surveyor. So even though I was originally hired to look more at Brookside, that kind of got brought around as like, oh, could you look at this too, so we can keep this part going, so. My role has expanded and shifted to some extent where I'm at now. It doesn't really matter too much, because just go out there and do what I needed to do. You pretty much have to look at the whole area anyway to kind of get a feel for what's going on, so it really, even though the scope has changed, it hasn't really adversely impacted me, it really. And then the other thing is, in looking at, ultimately I was originally hired to locate the rights of way, look at the improvements in them, and then set monuments. But if there's gonna be proposed changes or something, it would make more sense to set the monuments based on the final changes rather than monumenting just what is if you're gonna be changing it afterwards. I can still go out and monument what's there if that's where we end up, but just going through an exercise for the sake of going through an exercise that we're gonna change later doesn't really make a lot of sense, so.
Probably
To some
extra
extent,
expense.
pardon?
And some extra expense. I mean, if we
There would be some,
monument
at this
it,
point, I
then-
hadn't been talked to about doing the final alignment, but if I'm gonna go out there and stake things, it may make more sense to do the final rather than something interim, unless it doesn't get to a final for some reason. So, this here is probably about a 90% drawing. I've still gotta do some labeling and stuff, but I was a little bit of, with all the turmoil that happened and with a whole new board and Jim leaving, is I wanted to regroup a little bit and just say, okay, who's who and what are we trying to accomplish? Bring you guys up to speed so you know what I've been hired to do to this point.
I'm speaking for myself, I'm a little confused on what we're trying to accomplish.
That's
Uh,
kind of,
I've
that's why
heard,
he's
I
here.
think I'm hearing different
Yeah.
versions. So I'm gonna gamble around here a little bit. In short summary sentences, Public Works, what are we trying to accomplish from your perspective?
Yeah, so we've been brought in after the fact of Keisha, I think a little bit of planning and zoning, then, Dan had left, and then Fitzgerald was involved, and then as Mindy stated, Jim had marked up one map of like 8 monuments or spots that we were trying to accomplish where those right-of-ways, where those roads were. Then in the meantime, the road department has gotten left off of any communication, and so, as Mindy had stated, the road department was left off for a few months until you brought that to light. And so the map has changed and been marked up more of what we're trying to accomplish. So I think it's really just trying to, what are we trying to accomplish here? As the Beaners had stated, there's been several things that have been brought up to the county, a list of things that are in the right-of-way or potential right-of-way that they've asked the county to look into. It's been going on for years, well before I started at the county.
Before 2016.
So really the road department, we just wanna get established, like Dan was saying, where are the roads, where are the right-of-ways? And is something in the right-of-way, then do we need to take care of that? So we would like it to move along.
So we,
Because the Beaners
basically, Rob was stating that it would be best to work with the road department so that you guys can present something.
Right, but when he needs guidance, we kinda need you to give that guidance, because Jessica and I can't make a decision that's going to affect taxpayers.
Well, if
So-
it's, now these are, this is the original plot, right? And these are the original roads.
Well, like I say, this is actually the original plat here. There's been a few things that have been changed prior to where we're at now, so this reflects
And
more.
the
of the
commissioners
changes.
changed it, then?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
There was,
Do you have Alta's map by any chance that was marked?
I don't know, I have several maps of theirs. I don't know if one shows some meters that has arrow behind it, or,
Well, just at least shows like what we were trying to accomplish at.
I don't know if I've seen anything that shows what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, the Alta's, okay, that
I've
wasn't
seen a
Jim's.
map that shows existence.
Where,
Let's put it
okay,
that way.
there's, and then where Jim marked,
Okay.
Al-
Alta's-
Alta's was focused on the event, the vacating of that street
Okay.
on Tapman's side. That's what that was focused on.
I got one with an
And the
arrow
only
for
other
the
thing that
hills.
Stephanie hasn't been brought up is the owners here that had encroachments all over F Street.
Mhm.
They were required by the county to take those encroachments
sheds,
down.
correct.
Sheds, a basketball pole,
Okay.
plants, trees. They were
Okay.
required to take those down, I believe, October of 20.
Okay, and they moved those
And
sheds.
yeah,
Okay.
they've,
Which, and that's, and I think they've got a pretty good claim for their improvements were put in good faith based on I think they had some things there, so I think that's not as easy as it. It's an encroachment based on one scenario, but not on other scenarios, so that's where the boundaries are ambiguous enough, but I think it's, some sort of an agreement that works for all would be the best way to look towards it, not, oh, this is it, and it's cut and dried, and you either are or are not the right way.
So we've got a lot of people that are involved in this,
Mhm.
and so we need to figure out what you need us to do.
Cause there's different, going back, there's 2 or 3 entities that need a solution, and each solution isn't the same for the other 2. So, yeah, there's multiple solutions in the works here.
Who are the entities?
The Beaners,
Property owners?
the Ludwigs, the Tapmans, and,
Do the Tapmans still own?
No,
it?
they
Okay,
sold
They
that.
did sell it.
Yeah, and I'm not
Say the Tapmans.
I didn't know if it was
Yeah.
completed, okay.
the F Street property.
Yeah, so White's are over
Um,
here on the opposite side.
Tentatively the Whites, but I think I can argue the Whites are, like he said, was done back in,
2012.
2012, and their remedy was remedied by realigning Tom Shee and realigning E Street. So the players here are the property owners in the back, and is it Brookside LLC?
Brookside
Mhm.
Brookside
Development.
Development in the back, which was why we needed to identify Brookside Avenue.
Tapmans.
Also, the confirmation, understanding, explanation of how E Street the new location of E Street provides access to that right of way in the back. What is the delineation of the F Street property. There's a garage in the middle of the platted, right of way. What is the remedy for that? And then the Ludwig property with the garage encroaching outside, what is the remedy for that? There's a handful of other ones. There is a utility pole significantly out in that right of way,
Right here.
that has always caused, concern for snow plowing and parking and access, and then certainly Vista's like, well, we put it there when we put it there, and this is my understanding, if you want it moved, move it, but Vista's not obligated to pay for it to be moved, so at least that was their contention. So, and we just never got to where the county was gonna spend money to move that pole.
In the
yet. But-
meantime,
but
they've
it was-
spent 20,000.
But I'm just saying, so that's why that hadn't been done. So there's those few entities that have, the solutions that need to be determined is, are the Ludwigs in violation with their structure being in the right of way or not? The argument is there's wishy-washy surveying that could argue that it was put in good faith. If it was put in using one survey, they put it where they should. Later, there was more surveying done that showed that maybe it shouldn't have been put there. So who's right? And so then an agreement could be had on allowing them to have a structure within the right of way, or do a vacation of the right of way to those property owners to move their boundary around that structure and solidify that.
But you're
The other one
saying
for
if a
F
survey
Street-
had been done, there has not been a survey done on Ludwig's or Tapman's or White's.
Well, the work that Rob has done has been survey work that has been.
I'm just saying, you said if they
Well,
put their
and
garage down
I think the
on good
language
faith of a
actually-
survey.
I think these monuments were probably based on a survey he had, it was just never.
This was
Um,
recorded,
This
Hmm?
building
Was
here.
recorded.
It wasn't recorded, no,
This
it wasn't.
building
so
here
it really wasn't a survey.
I was gonna say, is it just the drill
Surveying
steel?
is, yeah, it wasn't an officially done correctly survey, no.
Yeah, is it just the drill
But-
steel?
But unfortunately, particularly back in the time frame that it could have happened, we did have an issue in Idaho of surveyors
Excuse
that
me?
did approximate surveys.
Oh,
Not put
okay.
things in because then they didn't have to report anything official and try to help the owner along, but my personal opinion is that nobody should have ever done that because of the problems it could potentially
Just
create.
left us a problem.
Has it
So,
all the
obviously,
property
over all
owners
these
been
years,
together
there's
and
been no
tried to
agreement
figure something
amongst
out
the
on their
people
own
living
before
up
they
there.
come up, or
There's been-
are they?
Well, just to let you know, this building here has been in there since about 1968. I lived up there for 63 years, so there was no survey here in 1968. The guy that built this house thought he was a surveyor, and that's where he ended up with his garage. And Dan, you're talking, this only affects 3 Heckler mining companies back here. So it affects their right of way to get to their property. The BLM line goes about like this, am I mistaken?
Could be, I haven't really looked on that side
So
of the line so
BLM
much,
would
so
be landlocked here, you can't get into BLM there either.
So originally, when the road department got involved in this was Jim's, the road was Jim's 8 spots that we were asking Rob to identify the roads.
Yeah, which is
Intersections.
basically, wanted to see a section of Brookside, and back again on where F Street was, this is the loss that's required for kind of moving East Street over. So basically kind of what we've got on here that we've looked at.
So that's where it started, and then the road department
Mike,
got left off.
Mike
when
Fitzgerald
I-
came back and added a few more points he was concerned about. He wanted to see Brookside further out this direction. Also wanted to see a little bit about East Street, and this map actually shows it.
And some of these are what color are yours, do you remember?
I had like some purple
Purple?
color, yeah.
Okay, and then I think when Mindy spoke to Ben, hers
Yes.
are the purple ones, so Jim's were the red, Mike's are the green, and then Mindy's are the purple. So you can see it's changed a lot
So-
since the road department got
Who's
involved
Ben?
in, the
Yes.
prosecuting
Oh,
attorney.
okay, okay.
Wait, yeah, a lot of people involved.
So most of the purple ones are just like intermittent points on mine, or are they supposed to be on specific?
It was just to show like where the edge of Tomsky was.
Okay.
When when I spoke with Ben and Ben spoke with Mike, it was like, okay, we don't need a survey monument for those spots, but it's just kind of to give a
Okay.
visual of, that's
Okay.
what the purple was supposed to be for,
Okay.
a visual of like
Yeah.
what is left and right or north and
Yeah.
south of the edge of the road.
Okay.
Because the same thing is on East Street, like, I feel based off of what we've researched that, you know, the county would have a lot more room to like push their snow off the edge in that because East Street comes further our direction than what they're allowed to use right now.
messy spot.
Well, we've got a lot of parties involved with conflicting and different aims and goals. We've got a process that has changed with technology and time and practices. And so how to say what is right and what is wrong, there's so many definitions of what is right and wrong.
That's one of my concerns, is that ultimately, it's hard to get to, okay, where was it really intended to be originally? I don't see any way that I can all find it to fix that. So you've had various interpretations, and sometimes you get boundaries that, because there's various interpretations, the boundaries are ambiguous, so that's what my feeling is it's best to find out what the various parties are concerned with, and is there a way to make it work for all involved.
Exactly, and that's,
Have some sort of agreement that.
there's gotta be an agreement for the parties here to be able to gain access, the BLM.
So, you know, theoretically, they would also have access potentially that way, but,
Okay,
BLM would, but not have that.
Couldn't the
The
Heckler come
line
down E and then come
the
down
line
Brookside?
comes off here.
Oh, their lanes.
So Heckler.
Yeah, Heckler
Okay,
almost
so
only
from
intersects with the alley
from
and
this
that's-
right here, Matt, is this BLM? Is that
What's
what you're
that?
saying?
So
You believe
from
BLM?
From the
owns-
monument, from the monument there, must
Yeah,
goes back
it's
to
BLM.
Matter of fact, I probably
Yes.
have
And this
a
is BLM?
assessor's map.
This is
somewhere that
BLM.
shows-
Okay.
Well, matter of fact,
This
it
is
shows it here.
Gotcha.
So
I see
Heckler
what
shows
you're saying.
Right there.
access, and this is alley.
Other than it's turned.
The
So
alley
things like
and the
that.
little
So
tiny piece
that
of F
monument
Street
there
are
is the same
Heckler.
as this monument here, and you can see where the line goes off this direction.
okay. So Heckler would lose it unless they have this.
Of course, this is, being the federal government, they may have access through there. Sometimes the federal government's a little tricky on when you do and don't have access across their property.
I talked to them about putting my water line through there, and they said they'd lease it to me. The ground.
BLM.
BLM.
They got very set procedures on how they can give things up or not give things up.
Yeah. And how much they want you to use it or not use it.
Yeah.
So what we're asking just to continue the process to get the whole map done, is that what we're doing? Is that what you're gonna do, maybe?
I think to some extent, I can get this map done, and to some extent, it's just finding out, you know, make sure that, the scope is consistent with what I proposed at this point, is, you know, I can clean this up, get it to you guys, and you're probably gonna have to sit down with the various parties that are involved and
Okay.
see if you can come to grips with it. But like I say, to some extent, it was also just to bring you guys up to speed on what's going on and where we're at this point, and
Now, does everybody, do these people, you know, do they have to agree with your survey, and do these people have to agree with your survey?
my
How does
survey
that
is
work?
a professional opinion.
Okay,
And that's where, like I say, is ultimately, I think there's some ambiguities out there, and that's why I wanted to emphasize that, because
Okay.
professionally, to go out and say one survey's better than another, we're all trying to resolve a 30-foot discrepancy different various ways, and so you're getting these shifts. Even though this one had some shifts in it, there's nothing really that I've seen that has relied on that, so it's almost a non-issue.
okay.
This bank survey, it's more, they say there's definitely two monuments here, when and how they showed up. I think they might have been somewhere around 1992, but I don't know that for sure. Like I said, this jog here technically shouldn't have been here, and I really think that he did a better job locating the right-of-way, as far as the railroad. So even with these people, even though, Chris Falls shifted all these lines, technically there could be a boundary issue in there because it's overlapping with, if the railroad wanted to go out and push a claim.
Does the railroad still have the right of way?
I believe so, from what I've seen on, I haven't seen where it's been needed to anybody.
That's Union Pacific?
Not sure who has it currently, do you know who has it?
Okay.
Well, we've not seen any, there's a whole history along there, but there's lots of discussion about whether or not it's been vacated or not, but nobody's been able to turn up any documents that, from the railroad to anybody vacating their right of way.
And one of the challenges of the railroad, of course, is the railroad tracks themselves were the best evidence of where the right of way was. Then there was a bed there for a while, and now with them doing the remediation out there, it was really scant what there was to. Matter of fact, Mr. Diener, actually, I was talking with him, he actually kind of showed me what he understood the center of the railroad to be, and I thought it fit very well with Banks' survey of this area. I found some evidence in here that very well could have been, but it was really hard to read the ground there, because so it turned out that I actually kinda suspect that monument there might be a good edge of the right of way. From everything I can see, it's about 2 feet from what I determined otherwise, and I was picking a spot on the ground saying this looked plausible.
Okay.
And the railroad tracks were in there when Banks did his survey on the upper lots, and also when BLM came through and redid their set, so.
But when did they pull the tracks up, do you know?
Well, it was the.
1987.
87.
Okay, cause this survey was done about 89, so he probably would've, about the time he was doing that survey then, but it was.
Yeah, and it wasn't until, 95 to 2000 that they were doing cleanup stuff up there, and then they actually pulled a lot of the ballast and that out of there, so that the grade was still there.
And that's what I figured, is that when Chris Fall was in there, I would've thought there was some evidence at that point to still tell where it could have been, but one of the things with several of the surveys they looked at, they didn't do a real good job of explaining what they did, so I'm having to go back and piece it together from, okay, how does this potentially fit into what happened here?
History meets survey here.
Yeah, it's, a good survey will basically show you what monumentation you held, what decisions you made, and how you got to the boundaries you used, and these were kinda like, here's a boundary.
Okay.
Let me go back to Stephanie for a minute if I can. Stephanie, what's the next need of the Public Works Department? To finish this? To
Yes,
fini-
this needs to be finished, so like Dan had stated, that we can move forward with what are we going to do if, once this is finished, if Ludwig's garage is in the county right of way or other issues that the Beaners have brought present to the county. We can't really go and enforce something when we don't know where our boundaries are to do that. So this would need to be finished in order to move forward, just really for everyone, I think all parties involved.
To it.
Don't you, Dan?
Right, so we know a handful of the encroachments, we can identify those, whether they are or aren't in or out. And then, once that's been determined, then we can then look at what is the remedy.
Right, we're not to the remedy yet.
No.
So if we can finish the identification of where the right-of-ways are best to be known, and there may still be even some, as precise a world as we'd like it to be, it may not be precise. And therefore, an agreement needs to be put together to all parties, the county, the property owners, to agree that this is now the boundary, or agree that this is going to encroach out into the right of way, and that if it burnt down, you wouldn't be able to rebuild it where it was at. You know, those kinds of agreements that spell that out it becomes their remedy. The other remedies are, you know, to determine where the access routes are, and or have we preserved adequate access to all the platted properties, or haven't we? And then what are the remedies for F Street in particular? So to start with, identify where the right of ways are, so we can identify where the encroachments are.
Okay.
I think I could help put together a list of those encroachments, along with the list we already have, and identify those solutions to then go have the discussions with each of the property owners to figure out, to make sure we've captured them all, but also what are the potential remedies now that we know whether they are or aren't. Once we can identify those and identify the potential remedies, now we know, is it a simple agreement? Is it a public hearing process? Is it a vacation of right-of-way process? Is it, which process is gonna get us there? Does the county simply need to convey some area or issue an encroachment permit or go through a vacation of right-of-way and do whatever land swap, whatever process needs to be done to validate that everybody has the adequate access that they purchased and that they have the right to, but also we've remedied structures and encroachments that have been placed in those right-of-ways over time.
I agree.
Okay, any further thoughts from you, Director?
I don't think so. This is kind of a get up to speed meeting for me as well. Stephanie's been running point on this with Jim in our department as much as she's been included, and so I've just asked her to continue with this rather than having her hand this off to me. I'll be working very closely with her, but I think it's important to keep any of the players in the game that have been in the game, so that we can find some conclusion on this.
Well, and I feel like it's very important that planning and zoning and the road department works
Yes.
very well together in this, like we're doing, because we're both involved.
Mhm.
And so having everybody up to speed on it is priority.
And I wanna give Beaners this, okay, so short summary, what would be your goals?
We gave them the option
This is my
and
project.
to follow our line down. That
In
wouldn't happen.
2016, it was first presented.
You gave who the option?
The county,
Okay.
if they could abandon this,
Abandon all of F Street.
all of F Street,
Okay.
except for this end, this would be 50 foot wide, which is because it's a new street. And I believe this F Street should be 50 foot wide, cause I thought after 1985, if you changed the road, it had to be 50 feet.
That's a little more if you're acquiring it like through a prescriptive easement or something like that. You can get different right of ways by specific deed on that, so. In this case, if they acquire a 40-foot deed, they can't expand it to 50 feet.
They,
so-
it was swapped for this one.
Yeah.
So
Can I ask a question, just,
Yeah.
if you were to have, say, a 10-foot easement through here that you put a water line through, could you then bring the road this way, or what would be the disadvantage of?
A 10 foot, I don't want a 10 foot, I want a 40 foot road, just like these are. So I can, if I can come out through here and then back out here and out onto the street.
Oh, so you're trying to get a loop type scenario?
I'd like to have a loop, it would make my property probably more valuable than trying to have somebody turn around here in a fire truck. If I build out.
I guess that was one of the things I was wondering, because if your road access came this way, you could have like a hammerhead in here for a firehead turnaround. And then you could have your water line go through an easement this way if that would work. That's,
Yeah.
I'm just
I want-
throwing suggestions out, so.
I want the same width of this road down here so I can use it for plowing snow, where the county can plow snow if I put something back here. But this was a no-go.
Because,
Who was it a no-go with? Sorry.
yeah, same question.
Was that legal or was that the other board?
That was
Dan-
Mike Fitzgerald directing Dan Martinson to speak to the Tapmans, and before leaving the meeting, Mr. Martinson said that they're not gonna go for it. We assume he went and asked them, and then that was it, so.
So then we spent thousands of dollars on this whole thing,
To block a vacate that had already been planned.
which is bringing up about whether this garage can stay there. This is an intersection. You can't block an intersection. I don't know how many times I've seen cars come out here and almost get hit on cars coming up.
But I don't know that you can technically, I mean, very well you can make the argument the right of way is really another 10 feet over there.
Which could be, that's why I wanted the edge of the road thingy, so we
So these are new
knew where the
people that
road
own
was.
this?
Yes, a new
So
couple,
you can-
property owners on this.
Maybe repitch the whole thing to them to see if, you know, this might work this time around if
And
that's-
this, if we came through here, then just so we're all aware, if a road came through here and that was open to the public, then that is open to the public. Anybody can come drive
Mhm.
through here. So a lot of people come and they want something opened or want it to be, but then they don't want the public back there. So just to
No.
clarify,
It's
if
a
it
county
opens a
road.
county road, then it is open to the public.
On a larger note on that specific issue, we can get into the details of each individual remedy, probably in
When it's done.
a better meeting.
Mhm.
In order to change effectively that kind of, it would require a replat of all of that section of property. For those, we moved E Street because we accepted and vacated a portion of E Street to those people. And then we accepted the 2 lots for the new part of E Street. So that wasn't considered a replat. It was an exchange of use of an existing lots in the plat. Those lots still are on the original plat, and they are still there. They're just now vacated. So legal description is they're still there. They're just vacated to the whites. The other 2 properties, lots 16 and 5, is that right? That was conveyed to the county, but again, those lots still exist. It was not a material change in the plat. To move F Street to another location would require absolving portions of lot 22 and 21 and those other lots, and would require a replat of those affected areas. That could be done, but that requires all the property owners to initiate that process to not only vacate but to replat that portion of property so that it suits.
Is that a
The other
county
name.
code requirement for the replat, or?
Well, when it comes down to replatting, if we're gonna materially affect the realignment of that street, we would look for a replat of those lots.
Cause you
In order
could,
to
I would think
affect
you could
that.
also do it through a vacation and a deeded right of way separately.
You could, but then what's the mechanism for demonstrating it versus a plat? Record
well,
survey and
the-
agreement would cover it, I would agree
No,
with you.
an agreement would have to be signed by the owner, and that's kind of somewhat different, but you could also dedicate right away via deed, and you can do a vacation process where you go through and say, okay, we're gonna vacate these and do the public hearings,
Mhm.
and it would remove that portion that was granted previously.
Understood.
But you're not creating new lots, or you're not necessarily creating, I would think a plat would be,
And
I
at the
don't know if
time
it's
of doing that, of
necessary,
course,
but
that
it's-
was,
it's
it
like-
would require the property owners to be on board with that.
Mhm.
And when asked what the options were and explain what these options were for either that agreement or vacation of this and that and those agreements, or a replat of the area, they just weren't interested. And so their other option was to request the vacation that they did request.
They
And so,
requested the vacate before the replat, before they requested this in 18 and it was like 19 when we were talking and meeting with the commissioners about redoing that. So I think some of the dates are getting, messed up, but I was trying to follow what you were saying about the plating and that, and I know you didn't do the 2012 white one, you said the commissioners just did that on their own. But Tonchi Avenue was moved and redrawn.
oh, I didn't say it
So-
couldn't be done. And
Okay,
as Rob-
I was just saying
and as
there
Rob
can't be
stated,
100%
it
law
can
that
be
it
done
has to
through
be.
agreement and
'Cause
it
it's
could be
already
done
been done up there.
through a realignment and deed of right of way. It's just messier that way, so from the
Okay.
planning world, we look at, if we're material changing an existing plat, it's a replat. And we replat those portions. Certainly, through other legal means, we can achieve the same degree, it's just,
but if you have a survey recorded, but you still have a drawing that people can follow along the drawing.
agreed.
So that, sometimes that's the hard part, is when it's done.
A muddier path, but still muddy.
Do I have any more comments from commissioners?
No.
At this point, I think the only action that we've been asked about right here is if we would like finish the process we've started with the survey. Is that
Yes, we need to
correct?
finish this.
And we're not to the point of remedies, we're to the point of gathering the data. Does the board wanna act on that, or give me a suggestion, or a motion, or we interested in having the survey continue to the point that the Public Works is asking us to get it to?
So I'll make the motion to get this rolling so we can get some things resolved on
I'll
it.
second it.
Continue.
I was gonna say, we're under an existing contract basically for this portion. I don't know how that affects making the decision, it's just continue.
It is.
I'm just working under something that was already approved, or does it have to be re-contracted, or?
Is there a time limit on it?
I think it was like spring of last year, but then it was kept changing and kept changing. and
Who
so-
signed that contract?
Mike.
And the question I would ask for the better of is the work being proposed still within the scope of
So
what was
far,
originally
yes.
agreed?
Yeah.
So the scope doesn't need to be amended or
Yeah, and that's why I was
changed.
pointing out, there is an existing
Okay.
contract, and I don't see anything changing other than just making sure everybody's aware that this is going on. And it may be that it could just continue out.
Honestly, I need to review the existing contract, so.
We
That's
can
why I
get you a
want to
copy of
clarify
that.
that you weren't asking to increase the contract, that the work being asked for was within the scope of what was originally.
And I can definitely get you a copy of the contract if you don't already have one.
I may have it down in my Brookside file.
I've got it
Well,
in the file
right
here
there,
too,
okay,
it just,
we can get it.
it's how we're going to get.
Well,
that.
that might be faster than ours, but whatever's the easiest way to get a copy of that
Like I said,
would
it's
be,
just,
okay?
like I said, at this point, I'm probably, other than final decisions and, getting something to you, it was just mostly that I'm getting close to that point, and with all the turmoil, I wanted to just slow down and say, okay, you guys are aware of what's going on, so.
I appreciate your help in doing that. We have a motion and a second, didn't we? To go ahead and continue with the work that's within the scope of the contract. And so, do we have any discussion by either commissioner before we vote on that?
No.
Okay, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? So we will continue with that, and I will review the contract with the rest of the commissioners and make sure that we're within budget and within scope of work with that, but I appreciate what you're trying to do. I appreciate everybody's perspective, and Public Works, thanks for giving us what you need and making that clear, and P&Z, thanks for being here. With that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. It's a little bit, yeah, we're running long, so we're adjourned, and thank you, everybody.
Yep, thank you.
And it was nice
That's
to
a
meet
first,
you.
doesn't it?